Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial, we'll be sewing this notch collar jacket. If it's something you're interested in, then let's get started. These are the scrap and craft fabric I'll be using for this tutorial. I've already gone ahead to cut them out. It measures 5 by 5 inches. Before sewing them, I went ahead to just place them on the floor to make sure the pieces are aligned together. This is what it looks like once I was done sewing my fabric. I've gone ahead to pin down my fabric. I added half an inch sewing allowance by the side, but for the armhole and the side seam I did not add any sewing allowance. For the hemline I added 1 inch sewing allowance. Next thing I'm going to do is to cut out my fabric. For the back is actually the same as the front. I added half an inch sewing allowance on the side and 1 inch sewing allowance on the hem. Then for the side seam, I did not add any sewing allowance. This is what my fabric looks like all cut out. I've also gone ahead to press interface on my fabric. I think I use Stay, Stay, but you can also get close stay. For my center front fabric, I use my normal Ankara fabric for the lining, and I've also used interface on it. While for the side, I used normal lining. I did not use interface for the side lining, but you can go ahead to use for yours. For my back, this is what it looks like once I cut it out. I've also cut out the lining for my back. The difference between the lining is that I did not add 1 inch to it. Remember, we added 1 inch when we're cutting out our fabric, but this lining, you're not supposed to add any inch, you're not supposed to add any allowance to it. It's supposed to be your normal pattern measurements. This should be done for both the front and the back lining. Back to the front, I'll be joining my seams together by half of an inch. This should be done for both your normal fabric and your lining. I'll also be doing the same to my back fabric and my back lining. This is what my front piece looked like once I was done joining. Always press your fabric once you are done sewing. This is what my back lining looked like. I'll be joining my center seam together. This is how my back piece looked like once I was done joining my seam. And this is how the lining also looked like once I was done sewing it. For my front lining, this is how it looks like once I was done joining them. Don't forget that your center piece will be the Ankara fabric, while the side will be the normal lining. This is my front Ankara piece. When we were cutting our Ankara fabric, we added 1 inch to the hemline, while for the lining, I said you should not add 1 inch to it. You should cut it as a normal pattern length. So this is what it should look like if you actually cut it the way I said you should. This is how my front also look like. The lining is 1 inch shorter than the main fabric. I'm gonna need to make a double welt pocket with flap on both sides of my front piece. The next thing I'm going to do is to join my fabric by the shoulder, making sure right sides are facing each other. I'll be doing the same for my lining too. For my sleeve, I prefer cutting my sleeve once I'm done joining my shoulders. I'm going to measure half of my bicep measurement, then I'll mark it. I'm going to measure the length of my sleeve. I will also add 2 inches sewing allowance. 1 inch is turning with the lining, and half an inch is how I'll attach it to my body, and the other half is joining of my sleeve to my lining. I'm going to measure half of my waist measurement. I'm going to go down by 3.5 inches, then I'll measure half of my bicep measurements with sewing allowance, then I'm just going to connect them with a curve. Then I'm going to join it from that point to my waist. What I'm doing is to make sure my sleeve opening is the same measurement as my armhole opening. I'll be cutting out my sleeve once I'm done taking out the measurements. I'll also be cutting out lining for my sleeve, just as we did for the jacket. The sleeve lining will be 1 inch shorter than the main fabric. I'll be cutting out my lining once I'm done with this. Once I'm done cutting my sleeve, I'll be attaching my sleeve to my jacket. I'll be using this wording as a shoulder pad. I'm going to measure the length, then get half of the length. After that, I'll cut it out in a curved shape. I'll go ahead and give it a notch to get the midpoint. I'll be placing the notch part on my shoulder seam, then I'm going to sew it. This is how it should look like once you are done sewing. The next thing I'm going to do is to join my sleeve straight down to the side of my jacket. I'll be cutting my collar next. I'll be using 2 pieces and it will be cut on a fold. I also added half an inch sewing allowance to the sides before cutting them out. This is how it looks like once I was done cutting. I went ahead to iron ST on the collar. After that, I'm going to fold my collar into 2, then I'm going to notch the midpoint. I'll be going back to my pattern to measure my lapel, which is 1.5. I'll measure the 1.5 for my jacket right there. That is where the sewing of my collar will get to. I'll be doing this for both sides. After that, I'll be attaching my notch collar to my center back. I'm going to pin it all around till I get to that 1.5 inch. So I'll be sewing from that midpoint to the 1.5 inch. Then I'll go back to that midpoint to also sew to the other 1.5 inch. I'll be doing this for both my Ankara fabric and my lining. I'll be attaching my lining to my fabric. I'll be pinning the edges together to make sure they align. I'll be sewing by 1/2 inch from that point round my collar to the other edge. Once I'm done sewing, I'm going to notch my collar all around. After that, I'll go ahead and trim that edge right there before turning it out. For my hemline, I'll go ahead and pin my fabric to my lining, then I'm going to sew by 1/2 inch. Once I'm done joining my hemline, I'm also going to sew my center front. Don't forget that the Ankara fabric is 1 inch longer than the lining, so when you are sewing, it should be like this. The Ankara fabric will be longer than the lining, so it's not a problem when you see this. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to open part of my back lining so that I can pull out my fabric from that point. Right here, I was just making sure the edges are out. I'll be using a pencil for this. You can use any sharp object. Just make sure you don't rip open your fabric. I'll be doing this for all my edges to get all the pointed edges out. Next thing I'll be doing is to join my sleeve. So I'll be pulling my lining and my fabric out from that same hole. You will have to pay attention to this part because this part is quite crucial. After pulling it out, I'm going to make sure the side seam are on each other like this. Then I'm going to roll them open to the right side. I'm going to roll both lining and the fabric. After that, on that side seam, I'm going to place them on each other like they are kissing each other. Just follow the way I did mine. You should not do it any other way around or else you might make mistake and your sleeve will be looking funny. After that, I'll be pinning my sleeve all around. Then I'm going to sew my sleeve. This is how it looks like once I was done sewing my sleeve. I'll be pulling my sleeve out and I'm also going to try it on to make sure we've not made a mistake when sewing. So yeah, I think we're still on track. It's perfect. Once I'm done with all that, I'm going to stitch up that opening right there. I'm going to close it up. So guys, we are done with our jacket. The next thing I'm going to do is just to press my hemline and my side seam so that they don't look funny when I wear them. Next I'm going to do is to attach my button. I decided to go for this black one. I'll be fixing my button on that point and I'll also make a button hole on the other side. This is how the jacket look on me, and this is the front side and this is also the back side. I love everything about this jacket, from the fabric to the fit. It's so beautiful. So guys, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my channel. Bye.